So the first thing I would like to talk about is this idea of the personal asset framework. Again, it's to give us a very general, broad, conceptual understanding of what sport is. And I start from a very simple point of view. When you think about sport and youth sport coaching and youth sport for kids, there's two things we should be worrying about. Is you want to develop interest in sport. You want to make sure that kids keep interested. If they're not interested in sport, they will drop out and you will lose them. So that, to me, is the most important thing. And I will talk a lot about interest today. And the second one is skills. And I think you know about skills. And we've done a lot of research, and we know quite a bit about skills. And I'm not saying it's not important. It's a very important aspect of youth sport. But we tend to focus a lot on skills and a lot less on how do you keep kids in sport. How do you keep kids interested to stay in sport? And these two things sometimes are conflicting. And they should not be conflicting. But again, most of my talk will be spent on these two things. How can we do that? How can we create an environment in sport where we develop interest and skills equally? So the personal assets framework gives us some elements, the determinants of youth sport participation. And the first thing that is the most important thing is the kids, what you do with the kids, the activities that the kids are engaged in. So practice, play, games, competition. How do you structure sport so that the activities, what you do with the kids, that's going to be a very important determinant of if they're going to stay and if they're going to learn skill. The second one is the relationship. The type of relationship that you entertain with your athletes, that coaches entertain with athletes, is, again, a very crucial aspect of their involvement. And the third one is the actual setting. Where do you do sport? In terms of arena, field. So the structural aspect of sport is also a very important determinant. And all this happens over time and changes over time. So you got a 7, 8, 9, 10, 15. It's not the same thing. And 18 years old, it changes over time. So if we visualize this, you can look at this from a point of view of you've got the three elements, dynamic elements of sport. And when you look at those three elements, this is sport. This is what sport is about. So sport is what you do with who, where, in a certain place. Okay, so to simplify things, that's a very simplification of sport, but that's what sport is about. It's what I do. Actually, I play, I practice, with certain people. You always have somebody else. It could, even if it's there's a coach, even if it's a single sport, and in a certain place, in an environment, in a setting. And all that, over time, leads to some outcomes. I didn't do this, so this is my graduate students that kind of get the wheel rolling. But the important thing here is that these three things, these three dynamic elements, they interact together. And you make changes to one, it's going to affect the other two. You make changes in your setting, it could affect the relationship and the activity. You change relationship, it's going to affect the environment and the activities. And over time, what this leads to, or what it should lead to, is some outcomes. And the way we define outcomes here, again, a very broad way of understanding outcomes in sport, is any countries in the world is interested in developing elite level athletes. That's performance. We know in a lot of countries in the world that children's physical activities is decreasing. So that's the participation aspect. So through sport, we can get kids to move. We can get kids to be healthy and stay fit. And then the last one is personal development. So we know and we understand lots of research that through sport is an ideal activity to develop personal skill, leadership, responsibility, initiative, setting goals, all these things that are, so that's important. So it's easy to remember 3 Ps, performance, participation, personal development. The point I want to make this morning is that these are not contradictory. They could happen at the same time. And when we have young kids, we don't have to focus only on one of them. And if we do, sometimes it's at the detriment of the other two. If we focus only on performance, it could be detrimental to participation or personal development. And it's the same thing if I focus only on personal development. So what I would like to propose this morning, and at the end of this, is I would like to convince you that you could structure youth sport in a way that equally you're going to develop elite level athletes, you're going to develop kids that stay in sport, and you're going to develop better citizens, better people through sport. That's the personal development. The problem with this, if you only have you see that in the middle there's something missing here. There's a big gap here. And the problem with this is that very often we look at only outcomes and we focus on only outcomes. We want to achieve performance. We want to achieve participation. And then we start thinking, how do I do this? There's something in between here that is very important, and that's the developmental process. It's the person, it's the kid that's in sport. And there's a kid in between there that if I focus only the outcomes, sometimes I forget that there's a kid there. So in terms of what I'm suggesting here is that we should have focus on the kid in a season. As a coach, you focus on those developmental processes. And coaching is about this. It's not about that. If I focus on this, if I focus on the determinants, and if I focus on increasing competence, confidence, connection, and character, I'm going to get the outcomes of performance, participation, and personal development. But very often we skip this. Very often we skip those developmental process and we jump right to outcomes. Those 4 C's comes from developmental psychology. They've been in the literature for a long time. They're important aspect, and we've been using them for the last 10 years or so, and they seem to be very, very they're very global, very generic, but easy to remember. Competence is about skills and skill acquisition. That's an important aspect. But you can have a very skilled athlete if the athlete is not confident, is not able to relate with other kids, other people, their coaches, their parents. That's connection. And the character. Sport has to be done with integrity, with empathy, with compassion, and that's the character aspect of sport. At any levels of sport, you want to develop athletes that are competent, confident, connected with others, and that have character. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a little bit of time on appropriate setting and activities very quickly, and I'm going to focus most of my talk on quality relationship and transformational coaching. So what do we know? So these are the determinants. And the problem with sport very often is that we talked about outcomes, but we talk very little about what do we need to get those outcomes. So in terms of setting, I'm going to jump right away to the conclusion of this and what I'm going to suggest here. But quite a bit of research. Think about setting, about the environment of sport, the club, the city, the team. That's the big environment around your club. So lots of studies, and quite a bit of studies have been done on looking at successful clubs or looking at cities, environments that are successful, that lead to better performance, participation, and personal development in kids. What do we know from these studies? Again, I'm jumping very quickly here. But from these studies, there's 3 things that we kind of seem to be very important. And it's the size, density, and proximity or accessibility to sport that are very important determinants of performance, participation, and personal development. So size in terms of how big is it? And cities, and we know that kids in smaller cities, smaller environments, smaller clubs appear to develop better, to have better success. And don't take this as, I live in a big city and I cannot be successful. We just need to think about density also in terms of the ratio of coaches and athletes, in terms of the ratio of number of athletes on a team. And that we have control over. It just gives more opportunity. And then the last one is accessibility and proximity. So I'm just going to give you here some very general understanding of this literature. But we know from some developmental psychology that setting with fewer people are increased involvement in different roles, effort, enjoyment, and personal effort. So lots of studies have been done on high schools, bigger high schools versus smaller high schools. And what they've noticed is that they've been able to show that in smaller high school, kids would play more roles. It's going to be easier to make the team. They'll play music. They'll be involved in a lot of different areas or different things. So again, thinking about size is an important thing within an organization, within a club. And you can make smaller units. The other important thing about size is that setting with fewer people, so the idea of confidence here, will strengthen self-concept through favorable social comparison. So just think about size here in terms of if you're in a very small club and there's not a lot of other kids to compare yourself with, then you feel good about yourself because there's not that many good kids around you. But if there's a lot of good kids around you, very often your confidence could go down. So it's kind of a protective factors with kids, and we've seen that kids from smaller town, smaller club, smaller environment, they seem to thrive in those environments because it gives them confidence. So the point here, again, is not necessarily size, but size creates this situation that have an effect on confidence. The integration of sports system with family, school, community that value role models. And here it's more about density in terms of number, in terms of having the same values in the school system that we have in sport, that we have within the family. And again, this has been seen through a lot of different bodies of literature that when they share values between different settings in which kids interact, those values seems to be reinforced. There's no reason here that in school, confidence, connection, character, and competence should not be valued the same way as it is in sport. But we should not have different rules in sport. You cannot cheat in sport and not cheat in school. So I think as coaches, we have a very important role here to say that within sport, it's the same values that we have in society and in family, and these values need to be reinforced. Another one here is environment that promote diversification. So usually with less dense, smaller environment, accessible environment, we have opportunity for kids to play and for kids to do different sport. And then the last one here is accessibility, and I think I want to throw this out there. Not a lot of support for that from the general literature, but within the sport literature, I would say that accessibility is more important than quality for kids. Accessibility, making sure that the kids have access, they can go and play. They don't need the best soccer field. They don't need the best golf course. They don't need the best basketball arena, or they just need a place to do it. A safe place, a safe environment. So that's the appropriate setting. The next one is personal engagement in activities. So here I just talked about this and how it connects to the C's and the P's. What about personal engagement in activities? I think we know quite a bit about this. And you know, we could spend a lot of time on this, but I won't. But we know that early diversification, involvement in a lot of different sports at a young age leads to performance, participation, and personal development. And we know that play, where there's no adults, where there's minimal types of coaching, is very important to keep children interested in sport. What do we do as adults is sometimes we take the fun out of sport because it's important to develop skills. But remember, interest and skill, how they can conflict. So lots of studies, lots of research. What can we conclude from that research is diversity between sport. Doing a lot of different sport is an important thing for complete athletes, for the achievement of the 3 Ps, and diversity within a sport. So that means play. That means doing different types of practice. That means doing different types of competition. So that diversity across sport, diversity between sport seems to be 2 things that are very important in terms of engaging the kids and maintaining interest throughout development. I just wanted to show you, because this is just the, you can find this on the NBA website. I just did some work with the National Basketball Association in the US, and we developed some guidelines. And I think the point I want to make here is that we should not be prescriptive, and we should not suggest, I think it's all this principle of diversification in play are kind of universal principle, but they need to be adapted to cultural constraint and cultural background but how do we take this? And here's just an example of what we did with the youth basketball in the US. we suggested those guidelines. You can find them on the website below them. But we just suggested guidelines in terms of participation guideline, in terms of numbers of recommended game length, number of games, practice length, number of practice per week, and a time here in terms of, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just want to give you a sense of, we've got a set of principles that we understand from research. How can we do this and translate it in something that is practical and applied? And you should not be taking these guidelines as I'm going to use this for my basketball club, but just take the principle and try to see how it applies here. But I think the important thing with this is, you see here we have rest guidelines, so based on hours of sleep that kids need. And I can tell you that I didn't get the number of hours of sleep I needed last night. But this is for different age group, and then the last one is maximum guideline in terms of number of games and length of games. The whole idea here is that kids are busy. Kids are asked to do a lot of different things. They're not doing only one sport. So when you consider guideline for one sport, you need to consider that if you want diversification, you need to make sure that the kids have time to do other sport. Or if the kids don't have time to do other, then you need diversification within one sport. And the kid needs to sleep, and they need to go to school, and they need to do homework, and they need to spend time with friends, and sometimes they need time off. You know, an hour at night to do nothing, be bored. And so very often we look at this, and we need to design the guidelines at different ages so that there's opportunity for diversification. The last gear, and I'm going to spend most of the time here on, is quality relationship. And when we think about quality relationship, we could spend the whole day talking about relationships in sport. And this gear includes parents-athletes relationship, coach-athlete relationship, coach-coach relationship, peer relationship. So there's a lot of relationships in sport that makes the environment positive or negative. I'm going to focus on coach-athlete relationship. And again, sorry if in the back I don't think you see this. I just want to show you that there's a lot of research that has been done on coach-athlete relationship and on coach behaviors and how it affects athletes. But a lot of different ways have been people have used a lot of different lands, different theories. And some of the first one that we've done is that we thought that coaches are like teachers. And they are. But you know, they need to teach skills, and instruction is one of the most important things. It's very important. The second one here, coach as manager, coach as motivator in terms of autonomy supportive, and coaches, they need to motivate their athletes. So coaches as partner, agent of personal development, coaches have all these roles. And when you look at it, you know, this is a little easier to see, but that's what coaches need to do. They have all these things to do. They need to teach, they need to motivate, they need to develop the kids, they need to be a motivator. So it's kind of complex, a very complex task. And the problem with the research is that people have looked at those in a very single way and say, okay, now I need to teach, and I need to be a motivator. But what I would like to do here is try to look at this from more an inclusive way, and looking at coaching, how can we do that through a relationship? How can we through some personal relationship or some leadership, looking at some leadership theory that would allow us to kind of integrate those roles of the coach so that you're very successful and very effective at the developing people and at developing athletes. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here on looking at leadership and using a leadership perspective to coaching. So just think about here leadership behaviors. What I would like to focus on is very often all these roles that we've talked about coaches, and what coaches learn is what to do. So you need to teach skills. You need to interact with athletes in a certain way. You need to have meeting with parents. So very often it's about the what to do. What I will argue here, and the rest of the talk that I'm going to say, is that the most important aspect of coaching is not the what, but it's the how. Is how do I give instruction? how do I interact with my athlete? How do I do these things? And it's the interactive aspect of coaching that is one of the most important aspects of coaching. And I have an exercise. I'm not going to do it now, but I ask people to think about the best coaches they ever had. And think about you can do it, take 20 seconds. Think about the best coach you ever had in your life, in sport. And think about the behaviors and the characteristics of that coach. You can write things down if you want. And then I ask people after that to think about the worst coach they ever had. And think about the behaviors and the characteristics of that coach. And then you can write these things down. Usually it will take a bit more time to do this. But usually what people come up with is the best coach is really about what they remember is not, it was not the best technical coach. It was not, sometimes it is, and that's fine, but it really is about relationship. It really is about how they connected with you as a person. And that is usually the coach that is the most remembered. So when you think about coaching, what do we do to promote that? How do we train coaches to do that? Not much. We don't do that much to really, and the problem is that it's a bit subjective. You know, it's hard. Like how do you, so what I'm going to talk about in here a little bit is really making that point, the motivational tone, the behaviors, the content, the structures of behaviors that you have, the pattern, the sequences of behaviors, who you're talking to, are you talking to your group, you're talking to many athletes at the same time, all those are very important aspects of effectiveness in coaching. I'm just going to give you an example here of the what and the how. And the example that I have is an instruction. So this is a volleyball coach. And the volleyball coach just saw a player making an error. Okay, so I'm going to give you two different ways of giving instruction. Okay, the first one, so the player just made an error. The coach said, "You're an awful player. Close the gap on the block or I'll find someone who will." Okay, so that's instruction. So if you look at this, the coach just gave an instruction. So you need to close the gap on the block or I'll find someone else to do it. Or you could have a coach that says, "Looks like there's a gap in our block and it's allowing some hits through. What could we do to improve that?" This is instruction also, but it's a very different way of giving instruction. So again, I just want you to focus a bit about instruction is very important in coaching, but how you give instruction is also crucial and also a determinant of very much important determinant of effectiveness. And I'll talk about some studies here where we really were able to show that. So if we think about leadership, okay, because I think leadership is the way of conceptualizing how I interact with people. It's one good way, one kind of theoretical framework that would allow us to see that type of interaction, how I interact. So here you have full range leadership model where you have leaders, you have behaviors that could be very effective or ineffective, passive to active. Okay, so if you look at this quadrant, probably you want behaviors that are mostly here, that are active and effective. So when you look at this, you have different types of interactive style or leadership style. The first one is laissez-faire. So that's the coach that does not very much. They will check their phone or do different things during practice. So that's on the ineffective side and passive. Another style is to be active but ineffective. So you're an awful player, close the gap on the block or I'll find someone else to do it. That would be a toxic type of behavior. Okay, when you talk to your athletes that way. So it's ineffective and it's active because I'm speaking as a coach. Another one is neutral. So basically you say something but you don't use, so we probably all know a lot of people that are kind of always keep the same tone of voice, and you don't know if they're angry or if they're happy or if they're, so this kind of neutral seems to be, we don't know too much about it, but seems to be not that effective, very passive. It's just coaches that don't show a lot of emotion. And then the transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is more about, and I'll talk about these a little bit more, but it's more about a transaction. So here, the best example here, close the gap on the block, or I'll find someone else to do it. That's a transactional style. So it's a transaction. You do this, or I'm going to do something else that, that's going to be costly for you. And then, so again, that's active. It could be effective, but so very often with kids, it could be ineffective. And then we have this idea of transformational leadership. Here, there's a lot of leadership literature, leadership theory that would fit there. Charismatic leadership, there's situational leadership, there's kind of a lot of, but transformational leadership appears to be, in the literature at least, the one that is the most researched, where there's a more literature around this concept. But again, there's there's a lot of other theory that we could put into that quadrant. Just going to go over those leadership style very quickly. So what is laissez-faire in coaching? What does it look like? Again, it's the coach that are on their phone during practice. They don't care. They just show disinterest or ambivalence toward their athletes. So that's a style. That's a leadership style. The toxic leadership, again, the example that I gave, the coach that is displaying negative attitudes or feeling towards their athletes, and again, it happens quite a bit. And the fact that it is toxic, the issue with toxic leadership, you'll see, I'm going to show you a graph later on. We observe coaches in practice. We don't see it very often. It doesn't happen that often. And I don't know if it happens in Singapore, in Canada, but the problem is that when it happens, it could be very, very negative. And it's like bullying. It's the research on bullying in the school system. Bullying does not happen often, but when it happens to a kid, it has a very negative effect. So it's the same idea with toxic leadership. We don't see it a lot, but when we see it, it could cause a lot of damage on kids. Neutral coaches engage in the mechanics of coaching without any discernible leadership style. So it's kind of, I talked a little bit about it. And then the transactional leadership. So that is used a lot in coaching. And I think it's not completely negative. I think sometimes you need to have some kind of transaction. If you don't arrive in practice on time, you're going to do push-up. So that's transactional. But the problem with the issue here is that maybe before you have that rule, there's something else that is more transformational that makes your kids arrive at practice on time. And I think that's what we need to think about. Because transactional leadership is often used in a very instantaneous way of getting results quickly. But transformational, you need to think about it a little bit more in terms of planning. So those are the styles, and again, there's not that many here that fits within the effective box. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about transformational, right on time. So transformational coaching and transformational leadership. So I'll talk a little bit about the theory and then how it fits. And I'm going to give you some real example. And at the end of this, so we're right at, perfect, 30 minutes. We're right at the halftime of the talk. And then the rest is very practical. It's something, we have been working on research that have looked at transformational coaching. And I'm going to give you some real example of real coaches, and some real behaviors. What does it look like? So what I want you to think about here is how does that fit within the personal asset framework, is that that's what transformational coaching would be. Okay, so we could replace quality leadership by transformational coaching. So I'm not doing it because it doesn't fit in the box. You see that? Not in the box, but the idea here is that transformational coaching would lead to higher level of the C's and performance, participation, and personal development. So what is transformational leadership? Transformational coaching is the process where coaches develop athletes into leaders by focusing on the personal assets. That's how I started the talk. I said coaching is about the 3 gears and a focus on the person. It's a person-centered approach. People talk about athlete-centered. I don't think so. Sure, athlete-centered is better than something, but person-centered. Yes, focus on the person. And then some results will happen in terms of sport. If the person is happy, if the person is confident, if the person is well connected with others, sport will just take care of itself, and they will. And then it involves behavior that empower, inspire, and challenge athletes for their specific outcomes of personal development, participation. So what is transformational coaching? There's 4 dimensions. So idealized and so transformational, so that from transformational leadership. Those are the dimensions of transformational leadership. Idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration, the 4I. So this talk's so easy, for 3C, 3P, 4Cs, 3Ps, 4I. I'll talk about these, and I think these will become a lot more clear as we go along. But what we've done is lots of research has been done on transformational coaching or with coaches, questionnaire research. So basically, we give athletes a transformational leadership questionnaire where it measures the 4I, and we look at outcomes. And those are correlational studies that have shown, and we've been able to show, those people have been able to show that people that display more of the 4I, more idealized influence, intellectual stimulation, and inspirational motivation, and individualized consideration, will lead to higher athletic performance, group cohesion, positive and personal development, lower levels of aggregation, and then intrinsic motivation. And the process that this happened, sorry for the people in the back, maybe you don't need, that's not that an important one. But this is a review of literature that my doctoral student, Jen Turnage, did. And basically what we've been able to show by reviewing the literature is to say that through transformational coaching, by displaying these types of behaviors, and just wait because you'll see what these behaviors look like in coaching, it changes people, athletes, at the intrapersonal level in terms of how they perceive themselves, at the interpersonal level, how they relate with others, and it also relates to the environment, the culture, and then eventually it leads to the outcomes. Just showing here, because the rest of the talk I'm not going to talk too much about research, but that this is based on research. What Jennifer Turnage did in her doctorate dissertation is she was able to develop by observing coaches. We did a lot of observation of practices and games of youth sport coaches. We've been able to show, that there's a series of behaviors in coaching that are associated with each of the I. And again, these will come back. But there's 11 behaviors of coaching that fits with each of the I, and these are very specific to coaching. And I will talk about these. So if you don't see them in the back, they will come back. And again, just to give you a little bit of background, so this is an observation system. So we're able now to go to watch games and practices and to code behaviors of the coach to see if they show more transformational behaviors or more transactional, neutral, laissez-faire, toxic, or non-applicable. The problem with the questionnaire research is that we don't know what it looks like. We just have the perception. But now we've been able to identify those behaviors that fit with it, idealized influence, intellectual stimulation, inspirational motivation. And we're able to see that, and we're able to identify those. And what I want to tell you is that those are not complicated. They're so simple. And they're so simple to do. And if you get out of here and you just implement 1 or 2 of those behaviors in the coaching, or if you're able to implement those in your program, you'll see a difference in your athlete. I'll just skip this. But that's kind of the process we do when we do observation. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to go through each one of these. What does it mean in terms of coaching? So what you see here is idealized influence. What is idealized influence? Is practice what you preach. So if you, as a coach, want to teach pro-social behaviors, well, you should not be yelling at the referee or do things that, if that's what you promote, if that's what you want to promote. So there's 2 behaviors that fit under idealized influence. How can I be an idealized influence when I'm coaching? And the point here is that as a coach, discussing and modeling pro-social behaviors, values and behavior, doing what is right rather than convenient, and demonstrating personal beliefs in your athletes. If you do that, you're showing idealized influence. The second one that fits under idealized influence is showing vulnerability and humility. How many times do coaches do that? When you make an error in coaching, or when a coach makes an error, just telling the kids, I screw up in practice today. I didn't want to do this. So showing that vulnerability in a lot of the observation studies seems to be related to kids feeling good about, my coach is there, but he's showing that he's a human being, he's a person, just like I am. So apologizing for mistake and sharing experiences, sharing some experiences. So I have some videos here, and I'm going to show you here just a short clips of what it could look like. What a coach that show idealized influence. So the next video is martial arts. But you can see, it's a very short clip, and then there's subtitle, but you can see here a coach showing idealized influence.
So I don't mind you crying. I cry a lot too. You know what I'm saying? All right. So I want you just to, you're pulling your blow. I don't know if you're facing fear, you're feeling that you may not make it. And we all face that from time to time.
So what do you notice there? Just a couple of things. How does that fit with idealized influence? What you just saw? Nobody talk in Singapore? Oh. Okay. So I cried too. Like as a coach, I cried too before. Like it happens to me too. Like what you just felt, I felt it that way too. What else do you see here from a physical perspective that I think is very revealing about idealized influence here? Yeah. He's kneeling down at the height of the kid. Instead of talking like this. So when you think about idealized influence, that's what it is. That's it, the ability to show vulnerability. Like I felt that. What you're feeling now, I don't always like to go to practice, and this is the type of things that. So thinking about idealized influence is really practicing what you preach. And often, we did studies and we see coaches, ice hockey coaches, telling the kids not to yell at the referee, and then the next thing that they do is they're up on the bench and they're just telling they're just telling everything at the referee. So that's not really preaching, practicing what you're preaching. So inspirational motivation. So that's kind of the easiest one. When you think about it, that's what kind of in coaching, and that's the one we tend to see the most often. What are the behaviors of coaches that fits with this? Well, discussing goals and expectation with your athletes. So holding high expectation and really talking up to athletes about believing in them and then setting some expectations that are, and again, I think it's something that within coaching that seems to be happening a little bit more often. Expressing confidence in athletes' abilities. So meeting and exceeding expectations, but really showing, believing that athletes can do it and that all athletes can do it. I'm going to use example of a coach that probably one of the best coach in the world that coach athletes with disability. And she is a swimming coach. She coaches athletes of a lot of different abilities in her pool. She has kids that cannot swim, but she can find something good to tell every athlete in every practice. She finds something to express that she really believes in them. Very different levels of abilities. Sometimes we tend to kind of just believing in the athletes that are scoring goals or doing the most. Promoting team concept and really promoting this aspect of working together, communicating and compelling a good vision. And then enhancing the meaning and challenge of athletes' task by collecting activities to a larger picture. Very often, you have sport. It's a small little thing. I'm playing soccer. But how does playing soccer relate to my life? How does this relate to my life as a person in school and family? And I think that is inspirational motivation. It's something that, what you do here, it requires a lot of effort. You're putting a lot of time in, but it's going to pay off. And it's going to pay off when you're, and sometimes just having these kind of talk with athletes, that is inspiring, that is empowering. It's something that really really make them to stay interested and stay motivated. Okay, I'll show you a little video here. It's an ice hockey video. It's very short. Maybe
Tyler's first time playing goalie. I know he's going to do a great job. Tyler, stop it with the stick.
Okay, so it's the first time, this goaltender, first time playing goalie. I know he's going to do a great job. Easy to say. And the whole thing about this is that, you know what? You don't have to add half an hour to your practice to be a transformational coach. What you need to do is just do the same thing that you always do, but just switch things around a little bit. Just change the language that you're using. Very simple thing here. This goaltender in hockey, I'm a goaltender in hockey. It's a very difficult task because when you make a mistake, the red light behind you just, and then everybody knows that you make a mistake. So it's hard. It's a tough task. But the coach is telling him it's his first time. Let's help him, and then I know he's going to do well. So as a kid, it's very inspiring. Intellectual stimulation. So coaches tell us when we interview them, they say, I do that all the time. When you observe them, they never do it. Interesting. But what is it? What is intellectual stimulation? So basically, it's involving your athletes in your coaching, involving them in your coaching practice. And this involves behaviors like eliciting athlete input, asking questions, or encouraging them to contribute about your practice. So really involving them. And sometimes because of vulnerability, because we don't want to be wrong, or we don't ask questions, or we don't ask people to really, the kids to tell us. And the other behavior here is sharing decision-making and leadership responsibility. So giving athletes opportunity to do drills, to help with some aspect of the practice. So that's intellectual stimulation. You're getting the kids to think a little bit. You know, instead of telling them to always do the same thing, give them opportunities to coach. Give them opportunity to be involved in the coaching process. And emphasizing the learning process. This whole idea here is instead of focusing on outcomes, you focus on effort, and you focus on the task that needs to be done. And that's a very simple thing again. But how is this done in practice? Here you're going to see the same ice hockey coach. And listen, it's very hard to listen, but even if you don't catch all the words, I think it's more of the symbol, just look at the interaction. And so this is before a game. A coach, just a second. This is before a game. A coach is asking athletes, what do we need to do today during the game? So the coach asks that question. So athletes will speak.
His first time playing goalie. I know he's going to do a great job. Tyler, stop an outstanding game.
Passing.
Passing. Luke, why do we have an outstanding game?
Passing.
Yep. Chase.
Back check.
Back check.
I
Anthony.
have another thing about the other game, but it's different from this.
Okay.
We beat this team 3 times, and but the other game beat us 3 times, and so.
We gotta work hard. That's where Anthony's going with that. We gotta work hard. Connor?
You hustled.
Yes, we hustled. All right. Very good, guys. Now listen, today the captain is going to be Angel. He's gonna run the warm-ups. 2 quick laps around.
So before a game, a coach you have an option. You can tell the kids what to do. Here the coach decided to ask the player, what do we need to do to have a good game today? Athletes just go around and we need to passing, we need to do this, we need to do that. But the most funny thing, sorry that we missed it, but it's a young kid. He has a mouth guard, and then he just keeps speaking. He just goes, and then he said, "Oh, okay, Bob, that's a good example. So what you wanted to say here is this, or is that?" And then, but he just the important thing here is that the coach just let him speak. Like the kids, we cannot hear anything that he's speaking about with his mouth guard. But I think the point here is about what is intellectual stimulation. Again, you have choices here of telling the kids what to do, or asking them and have them reflect on what they need to do. So that's a very important behaviors. And again, those the 3 types of behaviors under intellectual stimulation is something that we should be promoting. The last one is individualized consideration. So this is the aspect of person-centered coaching. So I'm going to tell you here a study we did where we look at effective coaches versus less effective coaches in youth sport. We look at behaviors. What was the difference between effective and less effective coaches? The most effective coaches were the coaches in practice that were able to go to each athlete and talk to them about their personal life. That was the only thing that was different. So those coaches were able to go and say, oh, how's your homework? How's your family? Did you go watch a movie last night? That's individualized consideration. That's being able to know your athletes at a personal level so you can talk to them. They feel that they're part of the team, they're part of. But that's a huge, huge aspect of coaching that sometimes we forget. So showing interest in athletes' feeling and perspective. So adapting activity to suit individual needs, displaying genuine care and concern for athletes' life, both in and outside of sport. How often do coaches do that? Really thinking about what's happening in your life. You have exams at school. Do you what's and really that's a part of that individualized consideration. Recognizing athletes' accomplishment and contribution. Providing feedback on athletes' behaviors and the power of thank you. Sometimes when athletes go and get the water bottle, thank you. How many times do you get a thank you note and you feel like, you feel that it does have an impact. It does tell you something about the person. And there's nothing wrong with when athletes do something well to tell them that they did something well and to tell them that you appreciate what they did. This one is an interesting, I think some people have seen this video. It's a basketball one, but I think it's a good example of individualized consideration.
On behalf of the NCAA and Augustana College, welcome to the sectional semifinals of the NCAA Division III tournament. In the spirit of sportsmanship, we ask all fans act responsibly and courteously. Abusive language or disorderly conduct is unacceptable and unwelcome. Profanity, racial or sexist comments or intimidating actions.
Okay, I don't think we all need to go to that extent, but it just tells you a bit about this coach taking the time to develop a handshake with every player on the team. How much do we devote to every player on the team, trying to get to understand them, understand their life, understand where they're at in their life, and again, it goes a long way. All right. So I guess the question is, we've been doing, so this is part of a grant that we have. It's a 5-year grant where we're developing this workshop now. It's around the 4I, and it's around those 11 behaviors that I just talked about. And when I started by saying that we don't do very much in coaching education about this relational aspect of coaching, this relationship aspect. And I think that this should be included in coaching courses. It should be, and we're working with the NCCP in Canada to try to put that into the coaching system. It has nothing to do with sport. It has had to do with relationship. But relationship, to me, of all the 3 gears that we have, is one of the most important aspects. And it will keep athletes interested, and it will develop everything else. So do coaches use transformational leadership or transformational coaching? We're in the process of doing these studies. As you see, it's not completed, but we had 281 athletes. We use video observation and we look at the percentage of time coaches spend being transformational, neutral, all the types of leadership that you saw there. The interesting thing that you see here is that coaches spend quite a bit of time being transformational. They use those 11 behaviors. They seem to be using them. But it's mostly inspirational motivation, though. They don't use too much intellectual stimulation. Individualized Consideration, and Idealized Influence. But the interesting thing here is that look at the percentage of time that coaches spend in a neutral stage. So basically, just doing things in a no interactive style, very, very neutral. They're not showing any time of emotion. They're just, this is what you have to do today. That's boring. You know, if I speak like this for the rest of the time and I don't show any emotion, is this boring? I'm sure you're bored already, but if I keep going that way, it's going to be worse. So I think, you know, in terms of, so that's kind of where we're at, and again, more research coming up. The main message here, again, about inspiration, about transformational coaching, and that is new, is those 11 behaviors. And if we can integrate, if we get coaches to do that more often, we will be very successful. And the thing here, and I'm going to come back in a minute on this, is that those are not complicated. Those are not rocket science. Those are so simple. But just put them more and get them coaches to do them more, you'll have a huge effect on the whole interest and skill. So summary and conclusion. So I started the talk with redefining success in youth coaching. I basically talked about two important aspects in youth sport: the development of interest, the development of skills. They're not contradictory. We need to develop them at the same time. We need to look at them in the same way. But sometimes we focus much more on skill because it's easy to do. It's objective. It's nothing. It's something that is measurable. It's something that we can do. We see the effect right away. But what I'm hoping to do, and what I hope you can have, is I've kind of provided a structure, kind of provided more of objective measures of what transformational coaching looks like. And here, we need to talk about the setting, think about the setting, the activities, and the relationship. So the relationship is a transformational coaching, but I also talked about activities, and I also talked about setting. So, and then this is the model. Just as a summary, appropriate setting, if you remember at the beginning, I would like to think about these as the structural determinants. So it's a determinant of good coaching, as determinants of good positive outcomes in sport, but it's structural. And what do we have here is that we have, I talked about size, density, and proximity and accessibility as being kind of important things to think about. That's the structure. That's the actual structure you need to think about as a club, as a city, as a country. How do I maximize talent? And sometimes it's by making smaller group, smaller clubs, less dense, more higher ratios of coaches to athletes, and then giving people accessibility, giving kids accessibility to do sport in a lot of different ways. The personal engagement in activities is the task determinant. So that how do I design that task? And I think there's two things. There's a lot of things here, and I'm sure there's way more than this. But one thing that we need to remember is this aspect of diversity. Diversity across sport, diversity within a sport. Kids get bored. And if sport is not fun, they'll drop out. So how do you keep it actual? How do you keep it actual by getting them to do different things, involving them in a high tempo types of environment. And then the last one was quality relationship. So that's the relational determinants. And I spend a lot more time on that aspect because I think we know quite a bit more about the other, but the relational aspect is something that has kind of being forgotten. And what I've been able to propose here is kind of proposing that more transformational leadership behaviors, more of those 11 behaviors will lead to positive outcomes. And those are framed within transformational leadership literature and the 4I. And what I want to say about the transformational coaching, again, bringing this back and those 11 behaviors on the 4I, but really the point I want to make, and just to finish with this, is the small, everyday behaviors can contribute to transformational change. You know, when you think about transformation, that's a big thing. It's not. It's a very small little thing, paying attention to people, paying attention to your athletes, paying attention to their life, saying thank you, saying all you do today, saying you and then doing it in a way, looking at them in the eye, looking at them and being interested is huge. Those behaviors, and when I ask you, think about of your best coach, very often when I do this exercise with people, they come up with those small behaviors that coaches did. That's how you remember someone. You remember someone because they're paying attention to you as a person. And they're very small little things. So the misconception that transformational coaching requires titanic behaviors enacted by extraordinary and unusual individual, it's not. It's everybody in this room could be transformational just by paying a little bit more attention about their interaction. And the whole idea here is that transformational coaching is that you're developing leaders. So you're the coach, but it's not about you, it's about the kids. And because it's about the kids will stay in sport, they will become the coach. And that's kind of the contribution aspect of coaching of sport. You need to think about that. You need to develop elite level athletes, sure. But you're also developing coaches. You're developing leaders. And even if they're not coaches, they're going to be teachers. They're going to do other things in society that this will affect them in a positive way. I think I'm done. No, I'm not. So one thing here, last slide, you can ask these questions. Is the behavior displayed by the coach, when you observe a coach, when you see a coach, does it help athletes to feel more competent, feel more confident, develop stronger connection with the coach or with others, or build their character? So for every behavior that a coach display, or think about including, or getting coaches to include those behaviors in their coaching, and if it does that, then you're developing individuals, you're developing people, again, that will make an important contribution. So thank you very much. Look at that, I have a minute left. Thank you.